The day Marcus moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood, most people hardly noticed. He arrived in a modest car, wore simple clothes, and carried his own boxes into the house. To the casual eye, he looked like any hard-working man starting a new chapter of life. He didn't make a grand entrance, didn't hire movers, and didn't even decorate his front yard with balloons or signs. He liked living quietly, without attracting too much attention. But little did anyone know, Marcus wasn't just a man moving into a house. He was the real owner of not only this property but several houses in the community. Marcus had worked hard for years, investing carefully in real estate. He grew up with little, and he learned early that money could vanish, but land and property lasted. Over time, he built a small empire, though he never flaunted it. He often bought homes under a company name or trust, letting tenants live peacefully while he remained in the background. For him, wealth was not about showing off but about creating stability and freedom. When he stepped into this neighborhood, he was not looking for conflict. He wanted a peaceful place where he could relax after long workdays, take walks in the evening, and maybe even plant a small garden. But peace was not what he was about to get. Living only 3 houses down was Karen, the head of the homeowners association. People called her HOA Karen behind her back, because of her strict rules, her constant complaints, and the way she often treated others as if they were beneath her. She was known to knock on doors about trash bins left out for an extra day, or to leave notes about lawns that weren't perfectly cut. Many neighbors tried to stay out of her way. She believed she ran the community, and in many ways, she did until Marcus arrived. The first time Karen saw Marcus, she didn't greet him. She stood at her window, arms crossed, and frowned. To her, he looked like a renter, someone who didn't belong in her neighborhood. She assumed he couldn't possibly own the home. She made no effort to welcome him. Instead, she began looking for mistakes. Within the first week, Marcus found a folded note taped to his door. In large letters, it read, "Violation notice, lawn not maintained to community standards." Marcus looked at his yard. The grass was barely an inch longer than his neighbor's. He chuckled softly, folded the paper, and placed it in a drawer. The next day, another note arrived, "Trash bin visible from street, must be stored properly." This time, Marcus had left his bin out for only an hour after collection. Again, he didn't argue. He quietly rolled the bin behind the fence and carried on with his day. Karen's irritation grew. She was used to people apologizing, begging, or even arguing back. Marcus's calm silence unsettled her. She convinced herself he was being defiant and decided she would not let it slide. She started walking past his house every day, phone in hand, snapping photos of the smallest details: his car parked slightly at an angle, his porch light left on too long, his mailbox not freshly painted. Marcus noticed her, of course. He saw her standing at the edge of his driveway, pretending to check her phone while taking pictures. He saw her glare when he waved politely. But he never confronted her. Instead, he continued about his business, often leaving for work early in the morning and returning late at night. One Saturday afternoon, as Marcus unloaded groceries from his car, Karen finally approached him. "You know, renters have certain rules in this neighborhood," she said sharply, not even bothering with a hello. Marcus raised an eyebrow but stayed calm. "Renters?" he asked politely. "Yes," she replied. "This community is for homeowners who respect the rules. You've already had multiple violations. If you don't shape up, you'll face fines and possibly eviction." Marcus paused, holding a grocery bag in his hand. For a brief moment, he considered correcting her, telling her that he wasn't a renter at all. But then he smiled, nodded politely, and said, "Thank you for letting me know." With that, he carried his groceries inside. Karen was left fuming. To her, his calmness felt like arrogance. She decided then and there that she would make it her mission to remove him from the neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, the notices became constant. Sometimes 2 or 3 in a single week. Marcus's mailbox filled with warnings and letters about supposed violations. The language grew harsher, talking about fines, penalties, and further action. Still, Marcus didn't lose his cool. He filed the letters away neatly in a folder, making no response. The other neighbors began noticing the tension. Some whispered among themselves. "Karen's at it again," one said. "Poor guy, she won't let him breathe," another added. A few neighbors nodded politely at Marcus when they saw him, offering small smiles of sympathy, though none dared to challenge Karen openly. She had intimidated too many people before, and most preferred to stay quiet. But one person, a young woman named Sarah who lived across the street, finally approached Marcus. She was in her late 20s, kind-hearted, and not afraid to speak her mind. "Why don't you fight back?" she asked one evening when she saw him watering his plants. "Everyone knows she's being unfair. She's been like this for years, but this is worse than usual." Marcus smiled at her, setting down the hose. "Sometimes battles aren't won by shouting," he said gently. "Sometimes patience is stronger than anger." Sarah tilted her head, curious. "So you're just going to let her keep harassing you?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Not exactly. I'm just waiting for the right moment." Sarah didn't fully understand, but she respected his calm confidence. She could see that Marcus wasn't weak, he was simply choosing a different path. Meanwhile, Karen prepared her biggest move yet. She called for a special HOA board meeting. She gathered all her evidence, the photos, the notes, the supposed violations, and filed a formal complaint demanding Marcus be fined heavily and eventually evicted. To her, this was the final step. Soon, she thought, he would be gone, and the neighborhood would return to the way she liked it. But what Karen didn't realize was that the man she was trying so hard to push out of the community was not only stronger than she imagined but held a secret that would change everything. Marcus, patient and calm, was quietly preparing for the day the truth would come out. And that day was not far away. Karen's obsession with Marcus grew each day. She couldn't stand the way he remained calm no matter what she threw at him. Every letter, every harsh warning, every glare she gave him seemed to bounce off as if it didn't matter. In her mind, this made him more dangerous. She told herself that if he wasn't reacting, it was because he was plotting something. The truth was far simpler. Marcus simply didn't want conflict. But Karen couldn't see it that way. She started waking up earlier in the mornings, walking past his house with her phone out, snapping photos of his yard, his car, even his porch. To anyone else, the photos showed nothing unusual. But to Karen, each image was evidence of a community rule broken. If a curtain was slightly open, she wrote it down. If his car was parked with one tire touching the line, she considered it a violation. Neighbors began noticing her behavior. "She's really going after him," one whispered to another while taking out the trash. "I don't know why she's targeting him," someone else added. But as always, most stayed silent, afraid of being on the receiving end of Karen's wrath. One afternoon, Marcus came home from work to find a thick envelope in his mailbox. Inside were copies of all the violations Karen had reported to the HOA board. They were listed one by one: overgrown grass, improper trash storage, parked car, mailbox condition. The list went on for 3 pages. At the end, the letter stated he would be fined several $100s and warned that continued violations could lead to eviction. Marcus read the papers slowly. He placed them neatly in his folder along with the others. For a moment, he sat at his kitchen table in silence, sipping a glass of water. Anyone else might have felt anger rise in their chest, but Marcus simply nodded to himself. "Patience," he whispered. He knew the bigger picture, and he knew the right time would come. The following week, Karen's behavior grew even more dramatic. She began stopping him in the street, blocking his car with hers just to tell him he was lowering the value of the neighborhood. Marcus remained polite, never raising his voice. He often responded with simple words like, "I hear you," or "thank you for sharing." His calmness was like fuel to her fire. One Saturday morning, she showed up at his door, clipboard in hand. When Marcus opened it, she pushed a stack of papers toward him. "This is the last straw," she said firmly. "You've ignored all of my warnings. The board will be moving forward with legal action to remove you from this neighborhood. You have no place here." Marcus glanced at the papers, then looked at her calmly. "Thank you, Karen. I'll be sure to review these carefully," he said, his tone steady, almost gentle. Karen expected him to argue, maybe even beg. But instead, he closed the door softly, leaving her standing there, red-faced and frustrated. She muttered under her breath, stormed back to her car, and drove away. Later that evening, Marcus sat outside on his porch. Sarah, the young neighbor across the street, walked over carrying 2 cups of tea. "You look like you could use this," she said kindly, handing him one. Marcus smiled. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." She sat beside him, looking worried. "She's getting worse. Everyone can see it. Why don't you just tell her? Why don't you put her in her place?" Marcus looked out at the sunset. "Because, Sarah, sometimes it's better to let people show the world who they are. If I fight her now, it will only cause more noise. But when the truth comes out, there will be no room for her to twist it." Sarah sipped her tea, shaking her head. "You're a stronger person than me. I don't think I could take it." Marcus chuckled. "Strength isn't always about fighting back. Sometimes it's about waiting." Meanwhile, Karen was preparing her grand moment. She arranged for a special HOA board meeting to discuss Marcus's eviction. She called neighbors, convincing them to attend, and even promised that removing him would restore the peace of the community. She printed out every photo, every note, and every complaint she had ever written. She practiced her speech in front of a mirror, imagining the applause she would get when the board agreed with her. By the time the meeting day arrived, Karen felt unstoppable. She wore her sharpest blazer, held her thick file of evidence, and strutted into the community center with her head high. The room was full of neighbors, curious to see the showdown. Some were tired of her antics but didn't dare say it out loud. Others were quietly rooting for Marcus, though they hadn't told him. Marcus arrived quietly, dressed in his usual simple clothes. He carried only a slim folder in his hand. He nodded politely to the board members and took a seat near the front. Sarah sat in the back, her arms crossed, watching nervously. Karen wasted no time. She stood up, cleared her throat, and launched into a passionate speech about how Marcus was destroying the integrity of the neighborhood. She held up photos, waving them for everyone to see, though most of them looked ridiculous: slightly long grass, a trash bin out for a few hours, a car parked near the curb. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes, her voice rising louder with each sentence. "He has ignored every warning. He has disrespected every rule. And if we do not act now, we risk losing the quality of our community. I am calling for his immediate eviction," she declared dramatically, slamming her file onto the table. The room was silent for a moment. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others whispered quietly, unsure what to think. Then, the head of the HOA board cleared his throat. "Thank you, Karen. We will now hear from Marcus before we make any decisions." All eyes turned to him. Marcus stood slowly, his calm presence filling the room. He opened his slim folder and pulled out a few documents. His voice was steady, not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Thank you for giving me the chance to speak," he began. I've listened carefully to everything Karen has said. I understand her concerns. But I think there is some important information missing from this discussion. He laid the documents on the table in front of the board. Here are copies of my property tax records. Here are my HOA dues, paid not only on time but in advance for the next year. And here are the official records showing ownership of this house. Karen scoffed loudly. Yes, yes, ownership papers. We know you're renting. Don't play games. Marcus looked at her calmly. Actually, Karen, I'm not renting. I own this house outright. And not only this one, he paused, then pulled out another set of papers. I also own the house you live in. The room froze. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. All eyes shot to Karen, who suddenly looked pale. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed the papers down and returned to his seat. The truth was now out, and the entire room felt the weight of it. The silence in the room was heavy. Everyone stared at Marcus as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. The man Karen had been trying to push out of the neighborhood, the man she had accused of being a renter, the man she had targeted with endless notices was not only the rightful owner of his home, but also the landlord of Karen herself. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked around the room, searching for support, but the neighbors who usually nodded along with her sat stiffly, avoiding her eyes. For years, they had tolerated her controlling ways. Now, faced with undeniable proof, no one wanted to defend her. This has to be a mistake. Karen stammered, her voice trembling. He's lying. These papers, they could be fake. Marcus didn't flinch. Calmly, he slid the documents closer to the HOA board. You are welcome to verify everything. These are official county records. You'll see the property deeds, the company name, and the ownership details. Karen's lease agreement goes directly through my company. The board members bent over the papers, flipping through the pages. Their faces shifted from confusion to surprise, and finally to quiet understanding. One of them cleared his throat and said, "He's right. These are legitimate. Marcus is the owner." Gasps filled the room. Neighbors leaned closer to one another, whispering in disbelief. A man sitting in the back shook his head slowly and muttered, "Unbelievable, all this time." Karen's face turned red. She tried to speak again, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. He tricked us. He pretended to be something he's not. He's been playing games with me." Marcus looked at her, his voice steady but firm. "No, Karen. I never lied. I never once claimed I was a renter. You assumed. And instead of asking, instead of treating me with respect, you judged me. You harassed me. You wanted me gone because you thought you had power over me." The room was silent except for the sound of Marcus's voice. He didn't shout. He didn't insult her. He simply spoke the truth, and that truth cut deeper than any angry words ever could. Sarah, sitting near the back, felt a surge of pride. She had seen how Marcus endured weeks of mistreatment without anger. Now, in front of the entire community, his patience was proving stronger than Karen's arrogance. The head of the HOA board looked around the room. "I think it's clear there has been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "Karen, your complaint is invalid. Marcus has followed the rules. He has paid his dues. There are no grounds for eviction." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "You can't just ignore everything I've done for this neighborhood. I've kept it clean, I've enforced the rules, Karen," another board member interrupted, "this isn't about what you've done in the past. It's about what you've done to Marcus. And frankly, it's unacceptable. You targeted him unfairly. That's not leadership. That's abuse of authority." The words hit her like a blow. For the first time, Karen felt the weight of the community turning against her. She looked around desperately, hoping for someone to back her up, but all she saw were cold stares and folded arms. Even her closest supporters were quiet. One neighbor stood up. "I think we've all had enough of this. Marcus has been nothing but respectful since he moved in. Karen, you've been making life miserable for everyone here for years. Maybe it's time you stopped." Others nodded, murmuring in agreement. Karen's lips trembled. She had always been in control, always feared, always obeyed. Now, in one night, her power was slipping away. Marcus didn't say another word. He didn't need to. He simply gathered his folder, nodded politely to the board, and sat back down. The truth had spoken for him. The meeting ended with the board dismissing Karen's complaint. Neighbors left in small groups, buzzing with conversation. Many glanced at Marcus with newfound respect. Some even came up to shake his hand. "We're glad you spoke up," one man said. "You handled that better than most of us could have." Marcus thanked them graciously, never showing pride or arrogance. He was simply relieved that the truth was finally out. Karen, meanwhile, stormed out of the meeting hall. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she pushed past people, muttering about ungrateful neighbors and liars. But no one followed her. No one defended her. For the first time, she was alone. Later that night, Marcus sat quietly on his porch, the cool breeze brushing against his face. Sarah came over again, her eyes wide with excitement. "That was incredible," she said, unable to hide her smile. "You completely destroyed her without even raising your voice." Marcus shook his head gently. "It wasn't about destroying her. It was about showing the truth. People eventually see things for what they are." Sarah nodded, though she still looked amazed. "You're a better person than most of us. If it had been me, I would have shouted at her weeks ago." Marcus smiled faintly. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. And sometimes patience is the strongest answer. But even as he spoke calmly, he knew this wasn't over. Karen was embarrassed, humiliated, and angry. People like her didn't just let things go. He could already sense that she would try something else, some way to claw back her control. He just didn't know when. Across town, in her own house which Marcus owned through his company, Karen paced back and forth. Her mind raced with anger and panic. How could she, the queen of the neighborhood, the one who enforced every rule, have been humiliated in front of everyone? Worse, how could she live with the knowledge that the very man she tried to evict was her landlord? She stared at the walls, the furniture, the very foundation of her house. All of it, legally, belonged to him. The thought made her chest tighten. She wasn't just defeated, she was trapped. But Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself. "I'll find a way. I always do." And while the neighborhood went to sleep that night, whispering about the shocking reveal at the meeting, Karen lay awake, her mind brewing with schemes. She couldn't bear the idea of living in a house owned by the man who had humbled her. She wanted revenge. What she didn't realize was that every step she took from here on would only dig her deeper into the hole she had created. For Marcus, the storm had just begun. The days after the HOA meeting were unlike anything the neighborhood had seen before. The story of what had happened spread like wildfire. Neighbors who hadn't even attended the meeting whispered about it while walking their dogs or collecting mail. "Did you hear? Karen doesn't even own her own house. Marcus does." The news stunned everyone, and slowly, the balance of power in the community shifted. For the first time in years, people felt free to breathe. The constant tension that had hung over the neighborhood because of Karen's rule seemed lighter. People lingered longer on their porches, children played freely without worrying about someone snapping photos of them leaving toys on the lawn, and even the HOA board members began moving forward with business without waiting for Karen's approval. But Karen herself did not take the humiliation well. She stayed inside her house most of the time, curtains drawn, avoiding neighbors. The thought of everyone knowing her landlord was the same man she had tried to evict haunted her every minute. Each time she walked past a window and saw Marcus watering his plants or taking a peaceful walk, her chest tightened. She felt mocked simply by his calm existence. Marcus, however, never gloated. He went about his days the same way as before. He greeted neighbors politely, smiled when Sarah waved from across the street, and lived with the same quiet discipline he always had. Yet he could feel the tension still hanging in the air. He knew Karen was not the type to give up easily. One afternoon, Marcus found another letter in his mailbox. This time it wasn't from the HOA board but from Karen herself. The handwriting was sharp, the words underlined aggressively. It read, "This is not over. You don't belong here. I will find another way to get rid of you." Marcus folded the paper without a word and placed it in his folder. He had grown used to her attempts. Still, he knew it meant Karen was planning something else, something bigger. He sighed softly. Patience, he reminded himself again. Meanwhile, Karen tried to regain her influence. She began knocking on doors, whispering to neighbors that Marcus had tricked them, that he was dangerous, that he only bought houses to control people. Some listened politely but shut the door quickly. Others rolled their eyes openly. A few even told her to stop bringing it up. Her reputation, once strong, was crumbling. People she used to intimidate no longer took her seriously. At a small neighborhood gathering, one man even joked, "Careful, Karen, don't upset Marcus, you might lose your house." The laughter that followed made her cheeks burn red, and she stormed away in anger. But Marcus still showed no reaction. When Sarah mentioned the joke later, he only smiled faintly. "People reveal themselves when pressure is high," he said. "There's no need for me to add to it." As weeks passed, the HOA board called another meeting not to discuss Marcus, but to discuss changes in leadership. For too long, Karen had been making decisions that served herself rather than the community. After the embarrassing incident, many felt it was time for new leadership. Quietly, a petition had gone around, and now the board was prepared to vote. Karen arrived at the meeting red-faced, trying to assert control again. She spoke loudly about protecting community standards, but fewer people listened this time. When the vote was finally announced, it was clear, Karen was officially removed as head of the HOA. The room erupted in murmurs. Some clapped softly. Karen sat frozen, unable to believe what she had heard. Her position, her power, her influence all gone in one night. She stood abruptly, her voice shaking with fury. "You'll regret this. You'll all regret this," she shouted, before storming out of the meeting hall. Marcus remained seated, calm as ever. Sarah leaned toward him, whispering, "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" He smiled gently. "When you let truth do the work, things fall into place on their own." But Karen was not finished. At home, she paced for hours. Without her HOA position, she felt stripped of her identity. Worse, every time she looked around her home, she was reminded that Marcus, the man she hated most, owned it. She couldn't escape the truth, and it ate at her. She began plotting ways to fight back. She searched for loopholes in HOA documents, tried calling lawyers, even looked into Marcus's business background, hoping to find something she could use. Each attempt led to nothing. His records were clean, his company legitimate, and his ownership solid. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to live with dignity. Neighbors began to warm to him, stopping by for short chats, inviting him to small gatherings. He was no longer just the new guy. He was becoming a respected part of the community. People admired his calmness, his refusal to engage in drama, and the way he carried himself without arrogance. But Karen's anger only grew. One evening, she stood in her backyard, staring at the house Marcus lived in. "How dare he," she whispered. "How dare he humiliate me in front of everyone?" She clenched her fists, her mind swirling with bitter thoughts. The next morning, Marcus found another note in his mailbox, this one shorter and sharper than the last: "Enjoy it while it lasts. You won't win forever." He read it, sighed, and tucked it away. He knew the storm hadn't passed completely. But he also knew that time had a way of revealing everything. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood slowly adjusted to life without Karen in power. The HOA board introduced fairer policies, neighbors felt freer, and the atmosphere lightened. Yet the shadow of Karen's resentment still lingered. Marcus often reflected on the situation. He never wanted a fight, never sought revenge. All he wanted was peace. And yet, somehow, life had placed him in the middle of a storm, forcing him to become an example of patience and dignity. Sarah, who often visited him, once asked, "Do you ever regret not putting her in her place sooner?" Marcus shook his head. "If I had shouted, if I had fought the way she did, people might not have seen the truth so clearly." Sometimes letting people expose themselves is the greatest victory. But even as he spoke these wise words, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's story in this neighborhood wasn't over yet. She was cornered, humiliated, and desperate. And desperate people often made desperate moves. Marcus knew he had won the battle. But deep down, he wondered if another battle was still waiting just around the corner. The months following Karen's fall from power transformed the neighborhood in quiet but important ways. For the first time in years, people felt free to enjoy their homes without constant fear of receiving a violation letter. Kids played outside longer, families decorated their yards the way they wanted, and laughter seemed to carry more easily down the streets. The air felt lighter, as though a heavy curtain of control had finally lifted. Marcus blended into this new rhythm gracefully. He never reminded anyone of his victory, never mentioned that he was the one who had stood up to Karen and revealed the truth. Instead, he focused on living peacefully. He often sat on his porch with a book, waved at neighbors passing by, and quietly offered help when someone needed it, whether it was fixing a mailbox, giving advice about property matters, or carrying groceries for an elderly resident. Slowly, respect for him grew, not because of what he had exposed about Karen, but because of who he was as a man. Sarah noticed the change most of all. She often said to Marcus, "You know, you've become the center of this place. People look to you now, not out of fear like they did with her, but out of respect." Marcus always answered with a smile, shaking his head. "Respect isn't demanded, Sarah. It's earned over time. I'm just being myself." But Karen was not adjusting well. Her humiliation at the HOA meeting still burned deep. Though she no longer held the title of HOA president, her pride refused to let her fade quietly into the background. Each time she walked out of her house, she could feel the stares. Children giggled as she passed, neighbors turned away, and some even whispered jokes about her downfall. To someone like Karen, who had lived for control and admiration, this was unbearable. She tried one last time to claw back her reputation. At a community barbecue hosted by a group of friendly neighbors, she showed up uninvited, carrying a tray of cookies as a peace offering. People accepted the cookies politely, but the room felt stiff. No one rushed to greet her, no one gave her the attention she had once commanded. Even worse, many drifted toward Marcus, eager to chat with him instead. Watching from the side, Karen's heart sank. The man she had tried to destroy had not only survived but had become the quiet leader of the community. She left the gathering early, her pride wounded once again. The final blow came a few weeks later when a letter arrived in her mailbox. Marcus had remained silent after the HOA meeting, but now the time had come. The letter, polite and professional, stated that her lease would not be renewed when it expired in a few months. There was no anger in the words, no insult, just a simple notification that she needed to make other living arrangements. Karen stared at the paper for hours, unable to accept what it meant. The home she had boasted about, the house where she had ruled over the neighborhood, would no longer be hers to live in. The irony was sharp. The very man she had tried to push out was the one with the power to remove her. She considered fighting it, calling lawyers, even trying to stir up sympathy among neighbors. But deep down, she knew she had no case. Marcus had every right as the property owner. Eventually, with her options dwindling, she began packing her things. The day she moved out, the neighborhood watched quietly. Some people stood at their windows, others lingered outside pretending to garden or check mail, all curious to see the moment. Karen loaded boxes into a moving truck, her movements stiff and quick. She avoided making eye contact with anyone. Marcus, standing on his porch, watched silently. He didn't smirk, didn't wave, didn't say a word. He simply stood with his hands folded, calm as always. Sarah came over and whispered, "You could at least say something to her." Marcus shook his head. "She already knows everything she needs to know. Words won't change anything." By evening, the truck was gone, and Karen's house stood empty. The neighborhood seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. For the first time in years, peace truly settled over the community. In the weeks that followed, the board arranged for a new family to move into Karen's old home. They were kind, friendly people who quickly fit into the rhythm of the neighborhood. Their presence erased the last shadow of Karen's influence. Life returned to normal, but for Marcus, the journey had left him with lessons to carry forward. He had faced weeks of unfair treatment, false accusations, and open hostility, yet he had never lost his composure. He had proven that dignity could be stronger than anger, and patience could outlast pride. One evening, as he sat on his porch with Sarah, she asked, "Do you ever feel like you missed the chance to really teach her a lesson? I mean, you could have crushed her, embarrassed her even more than she embarrassed you." Marcus smiled thoughtfully. The truth was lesson enough. People saw everything they needed to see. If I had tried to humiliate her, I would have become no different from her. Sometimes the best victory is walking away with your peace intact. Sarah nodded slowly, realizing the depth of his words. "You're right. You showed everyone a better way." And indeed, the neighborhood never forgot. Whenever people spoke of that season, they didn't just talk about Karen's downfall. They spoke of Marcus's calm, his patience, and the way he handled himself with quiet strength. He became a symbol of fairness in the community, someone others looked to when they needed guidance or reassurance. In the end, Karen's attempt to evict him had backfired in the most unexpected way. Not only had she failed, but she had also lost her own home, her power, and her reputation. Marcus, on the other hand, gained not just respect, but also a community that truly valued him. As the sun set one evening, Marcus took a slow walk through the neighborhood. Children waved at him, neighbors greeted him warmly, and Sarah walked beside him with a smile. He realized then that life had a way of balancing itself out. Patience, truth, and kindness had carried him through the storm, and now peace was his reward. And as for Karen, no one knew where she went. She disappeared quietly, leaving behind the house she once ruled and the community she once controlled. Her story became more of a warning than a memory, a reminder of what happens when pride blinds someone to simple respect and kindness. Marcus never spoke of her again. He didn't need to. The lesson was clear, and the neighborhood had already learned it well.